The sun hung low in the Texas sky, casting a warm, golden hue over the sprawling fields as we approached the family farm. My heart swelled with a mix of excitement and anticipation. Mark drove the truck, while the kids squealed in the back seat, their laughter echoing through the cab. "Are we there yet?" Emma asked, her voice brimming with impatience. "Just a few more minutes, sweetheart," I replied, reaching back to ruffle her hair. Mark chuckled, glancing at me with that familiar smile that made my heart flutter. "It's tradition, Emma. You know how Grandpa loves to keep us waiting." As we pulled into the gravel driveway, I spotted Robert standing on the porch, his silhouette framed by the soft light of the setting sun. He looked every bit the quintessential Texan farmer, with his well-worn jeans and plaid shirt, a gentle smile gracing his weathered face. "Sarah, Mark, kids," he called out, waving enthusiastically. The warmth in his voice always made me feel welcomed, like I was coming home. "Hey, Dad," Mark replied, hopping out of the truck. I followed suit, herding the kids as they scampered toward their grandfather. "We missed you," I called out, wrapping my arms around Robert in a tight embrace. "I missed you all too," he said, his voice softening as he pulled away. "You're looking well, Sarah. How's the garden?" "It's thriving, thanks to your tips," I replied, smiling. We spent the next few minutes exchanging pleasantries, laughter filling the air as the kids chased after a butterfly flitting nearby. Robert's eyes sparkled with joy as he watched them, a hint of nostalgia flickering across his features. I caught his gaze lingering on me, and for a brief moment, something unspoken passed between us. I quickly shook it off, focusing instead on the kids. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we gathered in the kitchen, the comforting aroma of Robert's home-cooked meal filling the air. I found myself at the counter, chopping vegetables alongside him. "You know, I always love when you help me in the kitchen," Robert said, glancing my way. "You have a knack for it." "Thanks, but I think you just enjoy having someone to share the work with," I teased, tossing a carrot into the bowl. He laughed, a rich, deep sound that resonated in my chest. "Maybe you're right. It's just not the same cooking alone." We continued to chop and stir, the rhythmic sounds of our tasks creating a comfortable harmony. I couldn't help but notice the way our shoulders brushed against each other as we moved about the kitchen. Each contact sent a strange flutter through my stomach, a sensation I hadn't felt in years. "Do you remember that time we made that disastrous Thanksgiving turkey?" Robert asked, a twinkle in his eye. I burst out laughing, the memory flooding back. How could I forget? You forgot to take out the bag of giblets. We had to order pizza instead. "Best Thanksgiving ever," he declared, laughter dancing in his voice. As we reminisced, I felt a warmth spreading between us, an intimacy that was both familiar and unsettling. I stole a glance at him, and our eyes met, lingering just a moment too long. I quickly looked away, focusing on the task at hand. The air crackled with a tension I couldn't quite place, but I shook it off, attributing it to the nostalgia of the moment. Later, as we settled around the fireplace after dinner, the kids curled up with their books. I found myself sitting across from Robert. The flames flickered, casting a soft glow that illuminated his features. He shared stories of his youth, tales filled with adventure and heartache. I listened intently, captivated not just by the stories, but by the man telling them. "Life can be funny that way," he said, his gaze drifting to the flames. "You think you have it all figured out, and then everything changes." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. Yeah, it's true. Sometimes the things we don't expect are the ones that shape us the most. Our eyes met again, and I felt a rush of something, an awareness I had tried to ignore. I was drawn to him in a way that felt both thrilling and terrifying. I opened my mouth to speak, but the moment was interrupted by Mark's laughter echoing from the other side of the room. "Mom, Dad, come look at this," he called, pulling my attention away. As I turned back to Robert, I caught a glimpse of something in his eyes, an unspoken connection that lingered in the air between us. I quickly stood up, shaking off the moment. "Let's see what they're up to," I said, forcing a smile as I joined my husband and children, unaware that the tension we had built would soon unravel in ways I could never imagine. The sun hung low in the Texas sky, casting a golden hue over the sprawling fields as I walked alongside Robert. The air was rich with the scent of wildflowers and freshly cut hay, a peaceful backdrop that belied the turmoil swirling within me. Each step felt heavy with unspoken words, and I could feel the weight of Robert's gaze on me. It was a strange mix of comfort and tension. I had always respected him as my husband's father, but now there was something else, something that made my heart race. "Sarah," he said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost a whisper, as we strolled through the knee-high grass. "Do you remember the stories I used to tell about this farm? The way it looked during the harvest?" I turned to him, a smile playing on my lips. "Of course, you had a way of making even the simplest things sound like grand adventures, like the time you got stuck in the mud trying to rescue that old tractor." He chuckled, the sound rich and warm, wrapping around me like a comforting blanket. "Ah, yes. I was sure I'd ruin my boots that day, but it was worth it to see the laughter on your husband's face." The memory sparked a warmth in my chest, but it was quickly overshadowed by the electric tension lingering between us. I glanced up at him, and for a moment, our eyes locked. His gaze was intense, searching, and I felt a flutter deep in my stomach. "What about you, Sarah? What's your greatest adventure?" he asked, his tone shifting, becoming more serious. I hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "I suppose it's been raising the kids," I replied, my voice steady despite the internal chaos. "Every day feels like an adventure, but it can also be exhausting." "Being a mother is a noble adventure," he mused, his expression softening. "But you deserve to have moments just for yourself too. You've dedicated so much to others." His words struck a chord within me. I had been so focused on my family that I had neglected my own desires, my own self. I looked away, trying to gather my thoughts, but the atmosphere around us felt charged, filled with possibilities I had never dared to consider before. As we continued our walk, I felt the vulnerability of our conversation sink in. "What about you, Robert? What do you do for yourself?" I asked, attempting to steer the focus away from my own turmoil. He sighed, a hint of sadness crossing his features. For a long time, I didn't think about it. After my wife passed, everything revolved around keeping the farm running and making sure the family was okay. But now, I find myself wondering what it means to feel alive again. His honesty left me breathless. I could see the pain etched in his eyes, a reflection of my own hidden struggles. "It must be hard," I said softly, "to carry that weight alone." "It is," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "But having you here, it brings light back into my life." The air crackled with unspoken words, and I felt the distance between us shrink. I could see the longing in his gaze, mirroring my own. It was as if the world around us faded away, leaving only the two of us standing in the midst of an unspoken connection that neither of us had dared to acknowledge until now. Suddenly, a burst of laughter erupted from the house, pulling me back to reality. The sound of my children playing, innocent and carefree, reminded me of my responsibilities. But as I glanced back at Robert, I saw a flicker of something more. Desire, perhaps, or yearning. It terrified me. "Maybe we should head back," I suggested, my voice shaky. "The kids will be looking for us." He nodded, but there was an intensity in his gaze that made my heart race. "Of course. But, Sarah," he said, stepping closer, "don't forget that it's okay to feel." With that, we turned back towards the house, the weight of our unspoken feelings hanging heavy in the air. I could feel the pull between us, a tension that hinted at what could be, yet remained firmly locked behind the walls of our lives. As we walked, my mind raced with conflicting emotions. How had we arrived at this moment? And what would it mean for both of us moving forward? The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow across the kitchen as I sat at the table, staring at my untouched cup of coffee. My mind was a whirlwind, caught in the storm of emotions I had tried so hard to suppress since arriving at the farm. I could hear the sounds of my children playing outside, the laughter echoing through the open spaces. But all I could feel was an overwhelming pull toward Robert. I took a deep breath, attempting to steady my racing heart. Just a few hours ago, we had shared a lingering moment in the barn that left me breathless. The way his eyes had locked onto mine, the unspoken words hanging in the air between us, made it impossible to deny the attraction that had blossomed from our shared history and grief. I shook my head, trying to dispel the thoughts, when I heard a soft knock at the door. "Sarah?" Robert's voice was low, almost hesitant. I felt a jolt of electricity at the sound of his name. I opened the door, and there he stood, the morning light framing his figure, making him appear almost otherworldly. "Good morning, Robert," I said, forcing a smile, though my heart raced at the sight of him. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he replied, stepping into the kitchen. His presence filled the space in a way that made it feel both cozy and charged. "No, not at all," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I was just lost in thought." He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "You seem distant," he observed. "Everything okay?" I hesitated, knowing that the truth was far too complex to share. "Just a lot on my mind, I suppose." I looked down at my coffee, unable to meet his gaze. "Is it about yesterday?" he asked, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The memory of our accidental touches during charades, the way our fingers had brushed together, flooded back to me. I felt my cheeks heat up. Maybe a little, I admitted, my heart pounding. He stepped closer, the warmth of his body radiating toward me. Sarah, He paused, searching for the right words. I never intended for things to become complicated between us. Neither did I said, my voice trembling. But there's something between us that I can't ignore. He took a breath, his eyes searching mine as if trying to decipher the very essence of my soul. I know, he said softly, his tone laced with sincerity. It scares me, but I can't pretend that I don't feel it too. Just then, the sound of my children's laughter rang through the kitchen, breaking the spell that had formed around us. I stepped back, the weight of reality crashing down on me. We can't. Why not? He interrupted, his voice low and urgent. Why can't we explore this? Life is too short to deny what we feel. I shook my head, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Because it's wrong, Robert. You're my father-in-law, and I'm married to Mark. But does that change what we feel? He pressed, his gaze unwavering. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to deny the truth that was sitting heavy in my chest. It complicates everything, I argued, my voice rising slightly. What about Mark? What about the kids? He took a step back, his expression shifting from desperation to resignation. I understand, Sarah. I really do. But I can't help how I feel about you. Silence hung between us, thick and suffocating. I wanted to reach out, to close the distance, but the fear of crossing a line pulled me back. I need to think, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. As I turned away, I felt his eyes on me, a mixture of longing and sadness that mirrored my own turmoil. I needed to escape, to find some clarity away from the intoxicating tension that seemed to envelop us. But deep down, I knew that whatever decision I made would change everything. Later that day, as we gathered for lunch, I tried to put on a brave face. Mark noticed my distracted demeanor, his brow furrowing with concern. Hey, you okay? He asked, reaching for my hand across the table. Yeah, just a little tired, I replied, forcing a smile. He squeezed my hand. You know you can talk to me about anything, right? I nodded, but the weight of my secret felt heavier than ever. All I could think about was the conversation I had with Robert, the undeniable chemistry that lingered in the air. As lunch went on, I felt Robert's gaze on me, and the tension that had built between us simmered just beneath the surface. I was caught between two worlds, and the fear of what lay ahead gnawed at my insides. After lunch, I found myself wandering toward the barn, the familiar scent of hay and earth grounding me. I knew Robert would be there, and the thought sent a thrill of anticipation through me. As I stepped inside, the sunlight poured through the gaps in the wood, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. Sarah, Robert said, his voice low and inviting. I turned to face him, my heart racing as we stood in the quiet solitude of the barn. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my mind. He stepped closer, the air thick with unspoken words. About what happened earlier? About everything, I replied, feeling the gravity of the moment. His eyes locked onto mine, and in that charged silence, I felt the world around us fade away. I don't want to lose you, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Neither do I admitted, my breath catching in my throat. The space between us narrowed, and I could feel the electric pull tugging at my heart. What was I doing? What would happen if I crossed that line? But in that moment, all I could think about was the longing in his eyes, the unfulfilled desire that mirrored my own. And as we stood on the precipice of something beautiful yet terrifying, I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. As the days rolled into one another at the family farm, the tension between Robert and me was palpable, lingering in the air like the sweet scent of wildflowers that danced through the open windows. Each stolen glance felt like an electric charge, igniting something deep within me that I had never anticipated. I would catch him watching me as I played with the children, a soft smile on his lips, and I would quickly glance away, my heart racing at the thought of being caught in this unspoken dance. One afternoon, while preparing lemonade in the kitchen, I glanced outside to see Robert tending to the garden. The sun illuminated his silver hair, casting a radiant glow around him, and I felt the familiar tug of longing, a feeling that had become both exhilarating and terrifying. As if sensing my gaze, he looked up, and our eyes locked for a moment that felt like an eternity. I quickly turned back to the lemonade, pouring the chilled drink into glasses, but my hands trembled slightly, betraying the calm facade I tried to maintain. "Is everything all right, Sarah?" Mark's voice broke through my thoughts as he entered the kitchen, a hint of concern etched on his brow. "Of course. Just a little warm out today, I guess," I replied, forcing a smile. I couldn't let him see the turmoil that was brewing inside me. Mark leaned against the counter, sipping his lemonade, blissfully unaware of the storm that was raging in my heart. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple, I found myself in the living room with Robert. The children were outside, their laughter echoing as they played tag under the fading light. The house was quiet, save for the soft sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Robert leaned against the mantelpiece, his eyes searching mine. "Sarah," he began, his voice low and steady. "I've been thinking a lot about us. About everything." His admission sent a shiver down my spine. I could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air between us. "What do you mean?" I managed to choke out, my heart racing as I took a step closer, the space between us shrinking. "I can't help but feel that there's something more here than just family ties," he said, his gaze unwavering. "I've lost so much, and I never thought I could feel this way again, especially not with you." His honesty struck me like a bolt of lightning. "Robert, this is complicated. We're family," I replied, though I could feel the truth in his words. The connection we shared was undeniable. "Family can mean different things," he said, taking a step closer, his presence enveloping me. "Sarah, I care for you deeply, more than I should, perhaps." "More than you should," I echoed, my heart pounding. What does that even mean? Before he could answer, he reached out, his hand gently brushing against mine. The warmth of his touch sent a wave of electricity through me, igniting a fire that I had tried so hard to suppress. I gazed into his eyes, searching for answers. And in that moment, the world outside faded away. "Can we just, for a moment, Forget what we're supposed to be, he whispered, his breath mingling with mine. And then, as if drawn by an invisible force, he pulled me into an embrace. My heart soared and sank all at once, and I melted against him, feeling safe and wanted in a way I hadn't felt in years. Just as our moment deepened, a cacophony of laughter erupted from the backyard, the children's voices shattering the fragile bubble we had created. I pulled away abruptly, my heart racing as reality crashed back in. "Sarah, come look," one of the children called, their excitement cutting through the tension like a hot knife. I turned toward the door, panic surging through me. "Yeah, I'll be right there," I called back, my voice shaky as I stepped away from Robert, who stood frozen, the weight of our unspoken feelings hanging heavy in the air. In that instant, I was torn between two worlds, one filled with familial duty and the other laced with a dangerous attraction that threatened to consume me. I glanced back at Robert, who looked as bewildered and conflicted as I felt. With a deep breath, I stepped out into the yard, the laughter of the children grounding me, but the fire in my chest remained, a reminder of the choices that lay ahead. The sun hung low in the Texas sky, casting a warm golden glow over the sprawling fields as I stood at the edge of the garden, my heart racing. I had tried to distance myself from Robert, to convince myself that I could ignore the magnetic pull between us. But here I was, caught in a web of my own making, unable to resist the allure of his presence. I inhaled deeply, the scent of blooming wildflowers mixing with the earthy aroma of freshly tilled soil, grounding me even as my thoughts spiraled. "Sarah," I heard his voice, deep and soothing, slicing through the afternoon air. I turned to see him approaching, his hands tucked into the pockets of his worn jeans, an easy smile playing on his lips. My heart skipped a beat as I felt the familiar flutter in my stomach. "Hi, Robert," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could hear the tremor in it. We stood there for a moment, the silence stretching between us like an unspoken promise. I could see the warmth in his eyes, a flicker of something that felt dangerously close to desire. "I was just checking the tomatoes. They're coming in nicely this year," he said, gesturing toward the rows of plants that lined the garden. "Want to take a look?" "Sure," I replied, forcing my feet to move forward, even though every step felt like a betrayal of my better judgment. As we walked side by side, the air around us crackled with unspoken words, the tension palpable. I could feel his presence beside me, solid and comforting, yet fraught with danger. As we reached the tomato plants, I knelt down to inspect the fruit, trying to focus on anything but the man beside me. "They look great," I said, my eyes fixed on the vibrant red orbs. But my mind was racing, my thoughts drifting back to the last few days, the stolen glances, the lingering touches, the moments that had changed everything. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. I turned to meet his gaze, and the world around us faded into the background. "I can't stop thinking about you." My breath caught in my throat. "Robert, we can't..." Before I could finish, he closed the distance between us, his hands gently cupping my face as he leaned in. The kiss was electric, igniting a fire within me that I had tried so hard to extinguish. I melted against him, my heart racing as the warmth of his lips sent a shiver down my spine. Time stood still as the kiss deepened, each second stretching into eternity. When we finally pulled away, breathless and wide-eyed. The reality of what we had just done hit me like a cold wave. "We're crossing a line," I murmured, my heart pounding in my chest. "I know," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But I can't help it. I've wanted you for so long." The weight of his words settled heavily in the pit of my stomach. I stepped back, putting distance between us, my mind racing with the implications of our actions. "We can't let this happen. What about Mark? The kids?" I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes as I fought to regain my composure. "I care about you, Sarah, more than I should," he confessed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture that only made him more endearing. "I just want to be near you." "I want that too," I whispered, the truth spilling from my lips before I could stop it. The honesty of my feelings both thrilled and terrified me. As I turned away, trying to catch my breath and clear my mind, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I fished it out, my heart sinking when I saw the name on the screen. Maggie, my best friend. I hesitated, glancing back at Robert, who was watching me with a mixture of concern and longing. "Take the call," he urged softly, giving me a reassuring nod. I stepped away to answer, my voice trembling as I said, "Hey, Maggie." "Sarah, you sound off. What's going on?" she asked, her tone laced with worry. I took a deep breath, glancing back at Robert, who was now pretending to inspect the plant leaves. "It's complicated," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I think I'm falling for Robert." "Whoa, hold on. Robert? Your father-in-law?" she exclaimed, the shock evident even through the phone. I know, it's wrong, but I can't help it. There's this connection, and it's like nothing I've ever felt before," I confessed, my heart racing as I poured out my fears and the turmoil that had been building inside me. "Sarah, you need to think about this carefully. It could ruin everything," Maggie cautioned. "I'm scared, Maggie. I don't want to hurt my family, but I can't deny my feelings," I admitted, feeling the weight of my choices pressing down on me. "Just promise me you'll be careful. You deserve happiness, but not at the cost of your family," she said, her voice firm yet gentle. "Yeah, I promise," I replied, even as doubt gnawed at my insides. As I hung up, I felt Robert's gaze on me, and I knew that whatever happened next would change everything. As the last rays of sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow across the Texas countryside, I felt an unsettling mixture of excitement and dread. My family was starting to pack up the car, the laughter of my children ringing in my ears, while my heart raced for a different reason altogether. The thought of leaving the farm without addressing what had blossomed between Robert and me felt unbearable. "Sarah, can you help me with this last bag?" Mark called out, oblivious to the turmoil brewing just beneath the surface of our family dynamic. I nodded, forcing a smile as I turned toward the trunk, but my mind was elsewhere, preoccupied with the man who had become the center of my thoughts. "Just a minute," I shouted back, my voice slightly strained. I needed to find Robert, to confront the feelings that had taken root in my heart. I spotted him standing near the barn, his silhouette framed against the fading light. My stomach twisted with anticipation as I approached him, each step heavy with unspoken words. "Robert," I began, my voice barely above a whisper as I reached him. He turned, his expression a mixture of hope and hesitation. "Sarah," he replied softly, and in that moment, the world around us faded away. "I can't keep pretending this doesn't exist. What we have, it's real." My heart raced at his admission. "I feel it too," I confessed, my breath hitching in my throat. "But what about Mark? This could ruin everything." "Maybe it already has," Robert said, stepping closer, his eyes intense and searching. "I can't deny how I feel about you anymore. You mean more to me than I ever intended." I swallowed hard, my mind racing with images of my husband, our children, our life together. But as I looked into Robert's eyes, I couldn't help but feel the magnetic pull drawing me closer to him. Before I could think of the consequences, I found myself closing the distance between us, and in an impulsive moment, we kissed, lips crashing together with an urgency that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. Just as I began to lose myself in the moment, the door to the farmhouse swung open with a creak that shattered our intimacy. Mark stood frozen in the doorway, disbelief etched across his face. The air turned electric, thick with betrayal and confusion, as he took in the scene before him. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his voice a low growl that sent a chill down my spine. "Mark," I stammered, my heart racing as I stepped back from Robert, the reality of the situation crashing down on me. "I can explain," Robert interjected, but Mark held up a hand, his eyes never leaving mine, filled with hurt and anger. "I don't need an explanation. I've suspected something was going on for a while now." His jaw tightened, and my stomach twisted in knots. "You think I haven't noticed the way you look at each other? The way you've been acting? I've been watching you both." "Mark, please," I pleaded, my voice trembling. "It's not what you think." "Not what I think?" he interrupted sharply, taking a step closer. "You're kissing my father when I'm not around, Sarah. What else could it possibly be?" In that moment, the air was thick with silence, and I could feel the weight of both men's gazes upon me, each searching for a truth that felt more elusive than ever. I wanted to explain, to justify my feelings, but words failed me. Instead, Mark continued, "You know, I thought I was being paranoid, but maybe I was just too trusting. Or perhaps I didn't want to see what was right in front of me." "Mark, I began, but he raised his hand again, cutting me off. "Just stop. You've made your choice clear." His voice softened, but the hurt was palpable. "And as for you, Robert, I can't believe you'd betray me like this, after everything." Robert looked stunned, a mixture of regret and defiance crossing his face. "I never meant to hurt you, Mark. This wasn't something I planned. It just happened." "Save it," Mark spat back. "I've got my own truths to reveal." He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for what was to come. "I've been looking into your past, Robert. I know about your debts, your failed investments, and the reason you've been so secretive lately." My heart raced as I shifted uncomfortably between the two men, feeling the weight of their unresolved issues pressing down on me. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely breaking through the tension. Mark's eyes flicked to me, then back to Robert. "It's not just about you and Sarah. It's about everything you've hidden. You might think you're protecting us, but you're really just protecting yourself." As the truth hung heavy in the air, I could feel the ground beneath me shifting, and I stood frozen, heart racing, caught between two worlds. The choices I had to make felt monumental, and I was terrified of what lay ahead.